everyone, officially welcome to Digital Earth Academy Biodiversity. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that the Denver Museum of Nature and Science is built on lands traditionally stewarded by the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ochete-Chacoan people, and that lands all over the planet Earth have been and continue to be stewarded by indigenous people. Throughout the program, we will have the chat available. You won't see each other's chats, but our presenter will ask you some questions. We'd love to hear your responses in the chat. If you're in a big classroom, if maybe one person can be in charge of the chat, however you want to organize that. And if you can't, we understand. There'll also be a poll, and you can put questions at any time you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Talia.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Mitch, for that fabulous introduction. I am so excited to get to be here today and so lucky to get to spend some time talking with all of you about biodiversity. So I am normally the coordinator for the Digital Earth Academy program, meaning I do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Teachers, I'm the one that's always emailing you, reminding you about these dates, telling you to make sure that you've got your link to connect to the program. But today I have the immense honor of stepping in front of the camera and telling you a little bit about biodiversity. I'm an ecologist by training, which means that I study ecosystems and the organisms and species and living things that are there in those places. And so today, I'm in a unique position to get to step in. Our normal presenter, Dr. Bob, is away doing other cool stuff, so it's all me. I am going to bring in just a moment, our pilot Asa. I'm going to add his spotlight in, so you should see both of us on the screen right now. Just like Mitch was talking about, we're going to be using this cool planetarium software to zoom around the planet today and show you a few destinations. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So biodiversity is a term that you might have heard before. And even if you haven't, you can probably guess what that word means just by hearing the word bio and diversity. Bio is the Greek root for life. So whenever you see the prefix bio on anything like biology, that is the study of life. Bio refers to life. And then diversity, of course, means difference or variety. So when we talk about biodiversity, we talk about the variety of life that we see on planet Earth. So we're going to visit a few spots today where that is really illustrated, visit some places with high biodiversity, low biodiversity. But before we go much further, I want to see if you can guess a little bit about what biodiversity means. So I'm actually going to remove our spotlight, so you should just see Asa piloting us away from Denver, and we're going to bring a poll up on the screen. That poll is going to ask you, what is biodiversity? And the question text is kind of long, so if you need to make that little poll window bigger, that's totally fine. But you can say biodiversity is the number of different species that live in an environment, the number of species in an environment that are not found anywhere else, or is it both of the above? So if you are learning as a group today, you're sitting in a classroom together, maybe go majority rules. Teachers, you can survey your students. And if you are learning remotely today, congratulations, you get to cast your own vote. And if for whatever reason you can't answer the poll, you can always tell us in the chat. Or maybe you don't know. That's okay. You can tell us that in the chat too. We're always okay with you saying, I don't know. Take just a few more moments to get those votes in. I see not everybody has voted yet, so go ahead and cast those votes and tell us what you think. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and end that poll and take a look at the results. Looks like we got mostly votes for both of the above, both of those options, but some people say the number of species that live in the environment. Believe it or not, both of the above is the correct answer. There are a few different ways that scientists might define or think about biodiversity, and we're going to talk through examples of both of those today. So we are making our way out of North America now. We're going to come down across Mexico. You can see Mexico starting to come into view. And we're going to head next to, or I guess first, our first destination today is a group of islands off the coast of South America. I wonder if anybody can guess what those islands are. I'll give you a hint. They're going to start to come into view now. They're in sort of the bottom right corner of your screen. I see somebody has put a guess in the chat. They got it right. I wonder if someone else can get it too. These islands are famous for being a place where Charles Darwin did a lot of his foundational observations to his theory of evolution. That's right. It is the Galapagos Islands. That is our first spot today. Several people chimed in the chat to say that. You all got it right. Congratulations. That is pretty amazing. The Galapagos Islands is our first stop on our journey today and is indeed perhaps best known for being the place where Charles Darwin did his observations in 1835 when he traveled there on the Beagle. As he started traveling around between these different islands, he started to notice some interesting differences between the animals that lived on all of those different islands. So you can see some of those islands are bigger, some of them are a little bit smaller. As he traveled from place to place to place, he noticed something interesting. One of the most, I guess, best known species on the Galapagos are the big tortoises that live there. And on some of the islands, he noticed that those tortoises had a really interestingly shaped shell. They were taller in the front than they were in the back. They were kind of narrow up near the top. These are saddle-shaped shells on those tortoises. There's another one with a saddle-shaped shell. And then on some islands, the tortoise shells were more rounded. They were almost uniform domes. So there's a good example of a domed shell on one of those tortoises. He also noticed that the finches, so he observed lots of different birds on those different islands, had differently shaped bills or beaks. Those narrow bills, like on bird number 4 at the bottom, might have been good for boring into cactus and getting the flesh out and eating that, where some of the birds had those bigger, thicker bills, like in birds 1 and 2 that you see on your screen now, that might have been better for cracking nuts or seeds. And he started to put 2 and 2 together and say, okay, clearly there is something in common between these species. There's tortoises on all of these different islands. They got to be related somehow. There's birds on all of these different islands. They got to be related somehow. But something's different between all of them too. And so he started to put together that maybe it's the conditions in an environment. So you can see this is a diorama of the Galapagos Islands. I actually don't know off the top of my head which one of those islands is represented here. This diorama is here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Darwin started to say there must be something about these organisms' environment, something about where these animals live that make these different features advantageous. And that was a big foundation for his theory of evolution that's kind of at the center of everything that biologists and ecologists like me think about today. Before we move on, I do want to take a look at a fun video that our host Mitch made all about bird beaks. So we're going to cut to that now. This is an experiment that you can do at home or in your classroom to explore this kind of biodiversity a little bit more.
Here's a fun experiment you can do to examine bird beak biodiversity. All you need are some tools that can stand in for bird beaks, some objects that can stand in for bird food, and some friends. Have everyone choose what kind of bird they want to be. And pick up the corresponding beak. And get into character.
Hey, I'm Flamingo, and I've got this big bulbous beak that I use to filter feed.
I'm Eagle. My beak is strong and sharp. I use it to tear things apart.
Hi, I'm Crow. I'll pretty much eat whatever. I have a generalist beak shape, simple and versatile.
Then put your birds in different habitats with different food sources and see how they do. First up, Flamingo Habitat.
I love to live in lakes and ponds and lagoons, anywhere I can use my awesome beak to eat my favorite foods. Tiny brine shrimp, blue-green algae, and a bunch of other stuff you find in the water. I filter feed, meaning my beak filters out all of the water and mud and keeps the delicious morsels. Also, my unique beak evolved to be the most effective upside down, like this, like this, like this.
Standing in for the flamingo's usual diet are colorful pieces of foam floating in water. And they're off. Look at them go. Flamingo is doing a great job with that filter feeding beak. Oh, we've got to see that again in slow motion. In one scoop, Flamingo has grabbed a whole bunch of colorful morsels. Meanwhile, Crow and Eagle can barely pick up one at a time. And that's time. Let's take a look at our results. Eagle was able to grab about 3 colorful morsels. Crow grabbed 7 or 8. And Flamingo there has too many to count. Flamingo wins!
I am Eagle. I live all over North America. I eat a variety of foods, including fish and mammals and other birds. I use my powerful sharp beak to grip things and tear them apart. I can also dive at up to 100 miles per hour. Let's go.
Standing in for the eagle's usual diet are small plastic animals taped to the table. And they're off.
Look at them go! Aw, Flamingo is doing such a great job in the filter feeding round, can barely get anything in this round. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Eagle. With those powerful jaws, Eagle is having no problem just tearing those creatures off the table. And that is time. Let's take a look at our results. Eagle has a bowl full of critters, Crow got a couple, and poor Flamingo just one or two. Eagle is the winner!
Hey y'all, Crow here. I like to live in grasslands and agricultural areas, but ever since humans moved in, I like cities too. I have a generalist beak shape. I use it to do all sorts of stuff, and I eat whatever. If I can find it, I'll eat it. Oh, and something you humans should be aware of, crows recognize faces, so if you're mean to us, we'll remember forever.
Standing in for Crow's usual diet is a bunch of random stuff we found laying around. And they're off! Look at them go! Wow, look at Crow having no problem picking up all sorts of different sizes and shapes of materials. Let's get a close-up of Crow reaching down and grabbing that tiny bead on the first try. That is just incredible. And that's time. Let's take a look at our results. Eagle did all right, Crow did incredible, and Flamingo did not so great. Crow is the winner! In our experiments today, we just looked at 3 birds and 3 different possible food sources. But if you want to know what would happen with all these different birds in all different situations, you're going to have to do that science experiment yourself.
All right, super fun video. I'll put myself back on the screen. I disappeared for a second. Super fun video from Mitch and some of our teammates here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We will send out a link to watch that video on YouTube after the program, as well as a write-up so that you can do that. You can recreate that experiment where you are. I do see a comment from someone saying they can't see me. That's okay. All you really need to be able to do right now is hear me. So what you should be seeing now is we're zooming out from the Galapagos and heading off to our next destination. Our next stop on our journey around the planet today is a place that might come to mind when you think of an area with lots of biodiversity. So a huge number of plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, all kinds of different things. I wonder if you can guess it. So we're headed over to South America. You might see a big river winding its way across the continent. Yes, I see someone has already put a guess in the chat. We're headed to the Amazon rainforest. So if that's what you were typing, that's what you had in your head, congratulations, you knew it. So the Amazon rainforest is, of course, marked by the Amazon River. It stretches for over 4,000 miles across the continent of South America. It has its headwaters in Peru and runs east across the continent, dumping into the Atlantic Ocean. So you can probably see the Amazon on the screen already. There's a big, squiggly, kind of brownish line amid what looks like a sea of blue, but I promise is actually green. Those are the tops of trees. That is the rainforest right there. So the water and nutrients from the Amazon River dump into about 2.5 million square miles, an area known as the Amazon Basin. And in that area, there are a lot of conditions that would make it a really good spot for biodiversity. So what we have there is we have consistent temperatures. So being a tropical region, things are nice and warm and lush year round. There's plentiful water from the river, decent consistent precipitation. All of those different things make it a good place with good consistent conditions where lots of life can survive and thrive. Now, in those trees, we see lots and lots of different kinds of creatures. Not only do we have several different kinds of trees, we also have lots of different trees, or excuse me, plants that are not trees. There might be vines that wrap around the trunks. There might be algae and moss that grows on the branches. What else do we have? We have species like bromeliads that don't even need soil to grow. They can just grow right on the branches of trees. And then of course, those plants support life. So there's a scarlet macaw. We've got monkeys and other primates, sloths and jaguars live in the forest too. Lots of insects and amphibians, all kinds of different biodiversity. There is a huge, huge amount of it in the Amazon rainforest. We've got reptiles like snakes. One of the reasons why this area is so supportive to so much life is, again, all of that water and those nutrients mean that tons and tons of different plants can grow. They convert energy from the sun into sugars and energy as they photosynthesize. Other creatures eat the plants. Other creatures eat the creatures that eat the plants. And there's this huge web of, you might call it a food chain, you might call it a trophic web. There's a huge web of support, lots and lots of different players in this equation. So we're zooming in over the top of the Amazon River. Now you can see it sort of snaking back and forth. There are lots of winding undulations in the river, and we're going to zoom in onto a small swath of the Amazon. And we just told you a little bit about the biodiversity that there is in the whole forest, but we're going to have you think about it in a slightly different way. So Ace is zooming us in, our pilot is zooming us into a spot in the Amazon rainforest where we're going to hopefully see some of those treetops start to come into view. And as we start to see those treetops become more detailed, hopefully our satellite data, everything will catch up with us here in just a second. I want you to think about how much biodiversity could exist in just one tree. So you got the tree itself. Think about all of the algae or moss that could grow on the trunk. Think about the other plants that might, those bromeliads that don't need soil to grow might be sitting on the branches. Think about all the vines that wrap around everything. Think about how many thousands or millions of ants could live on that tree trunk. Think about all of the creatures who eat the ants that might live on that tree. Think about monkeys or birds or other arboreal tree-dwelling species that could be nestled up there finding shelter. Think about maybe there's a sloth taking a nap in some of those branches. Think about all of the creatures that might be running around on the ground, digesting those decaying leaves, or even the fungi that are breaking down those decaying leaves. Think about how much biodiversity could exist in one spot, just one tree. And as we zoom back out, magnify that in your head. Think 1 tree, 10 trees, 20 trees, 100 trees, 1,000 trees, 2.5 million square miles worth of trees. And that might give you a picture of the amount of biodiversity that we see here in the Amazon. Pretty cool. We're going to start making our way onto our next destination now, saying bye to the Amazon. Those puffy things that you see, those white speckles, were clouds. So that's how much detail we can capture from some of our data sets here. And we're going to start to head south across the rest of South America, down toward the very bottom of our planet. I wonder if anybody can guess where we're headed to next. We're going south, and we're going just as far south as we can go without starting to go north again. I wonder if anybody has any idea. Yep, someone's already put it in the chat. Nicely done. I see lots of questions coming in the chat too. As a reminder, we will get to those toward the end of our time together today, but keep them coming because Mitch and I are watching. Mitch has already had to Google a couple of things for me because I'm not an expert in everything that you're asking me about, and that's pretty cool. That's okay. All right, we are headed indeed toward Antarctica. Congratulations to those of you that guessed it. We're taking a look now at the part of Antarctica that stretches pretty close to the southern tip of South America. And as we cruise, we're not going to spend a ton of time here, but as we cruise across Antarctica, I want you all to make some observations. You can put them in the chat. You can tell a friend. You can just think them in your head if you want to, but you're probably noticing that especially compared to the Amazon, there is not a whole lot of green going on here. We definitely are not seeing those big trees like we see in the Amazon rainforest. Antarctica is dry. The conditions are harsh. It is, in fact, a desert. Yeah, I see a comment in the chat that says, looks like a lot of snow and ice cap. Yep, there's a big ice sheet. Antarctica is, in fact, a continent, unlike the Arctic at the northern part of the planet that's mostly sea ice. There is a continent under all of this ice at Antarctica. So there's ice, there's snow for periods of each year. Antarctica is in complete and total darkness. So just like the Arctic at the northern part of our planet, as the axis tilts from season to season, Antarctica is completely dark for parts of the year. It is extremely cold here. The winds are whipping, and that means that biodiversity is a lot lower here than in the Amazon. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing here. To quote one of my favorite movies, Jurassic Park, life finds a way. There are species that live at Antarctica year-round. This is a South Polar skua. This one you can be found in a lot of different southern parts of the world, but the South Polar skua does unfortunately dine on penguins. It looks like that's the remnants of a penguin that it's got there with it. But it makes it work. Again, skua's got to eat just like everybody. So they live there. Penguins are, of course, one of the best known species of Antarctica. They live there year round. These are either emperor penguins or king penguins. I can't tell which one. The difference is mostly in their size. There's also seals. There are migrant species like humpback whales that come here for parts of the year. So there's a lot going on in Antarctica. Even if it's not Amazon level biodiversity, creatures figure it out. There are also plants in Antarctica. It looks like there aren't a ton, but they're very different from the ones that there are in the Amazon. This is a plant that's really small. It's close to the ground. Big plants like trees need a lot more water and a lot more nutrients to grow to their size. And they don't do so well with all of the wind that might be whipping around in Antarctica. So smaller plants that grow closer to the ground are going to be able to make it work. So there is still biodiversity in Antarctica, might just be a little bit different than what we find in the Amazon. And I wanted to go there because it really does illustrate a very important point about biodiversity, which is that the conditions in an environment are what predicts its level of biodiversity. Again, the Amazon has got that plentiful moisture, lots of nutrients. Those good consistent conditions mean that plants can photosynthesize, and there can be a huge food web of different organisms. There's a lot of O words that I need to say today. A huge amount of different organisms can live in that place, and Antarctica is a little bit different. So that's one thing I want you to keep in mind. The environment predicts biodiversity. We're headed next a little further north, and we're going to come up the southern tip of a different continent today. You're starting to see it come into view. I wonder if you can guess what continent we're headed to next. Yeah, I see a couple people saying Africa. That's right. We are headed to Africa next, specifically to a country in southern Africa called Botswana, and one specific place in Botswana called the Okavango Delta. Now you're going to see the delta start to come into view. Deltas are areas where rivers widen out and spread out a lot of water and sediment as they connect with maybe another river, or as they run into the ocean, or as they flood into wetlands, lowlands, and that's exactly what's going on here. So the Okavango River is widening out and turning into lots of smaller rivers and dumping sediment into this vast oasis in the middle of the harsh Kalahari Desert. You can probably see it coming into view now. I think it looks like a giant witch's broom. You can also think of river deltas as being a little bit like your wrist with your hand. So you might not be able to see me right now, and I definitely can't see you, but you could hold your hand up in front of your face and look at your wrist and think of your wrist and your arm as being like the river, and your hand and finally your fingers being like where that river spreads out. So the Okavango River carries lots and lots of water as well as nutrients into this delta. And the delta is where, again, that river is spreading out and sending that water into this lowland and creating this marshy swamp. I think we have some pictures to bring up. There we go. This photo and a couple of the ones you'll see in just a moment they were taken by Bob Reynolds, who is normally our speaker. So he got to visit the Okavango Delta and see a lot of the different creatures and animals and plants that live there. But you can see all of that silt and sediment. You can see how many plants and see how lush and green it is. This is an area where animals, a lot of those big African species that you all probably can think of, that you probably are familiar with, things like elephants and zebras and giraffes, they all flock to get their water. I see someone says that's very pretty, and I have to agree. What a scenic spot. So this is a diorama that we have here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It's depicting one of those water holes. Look around and see how many different species you can spot. The cool thing about dioramas here at the museum is that we've got the big animals in there, and we also have really small animals hidden. So there's even more biodiversity that you can't see. And there's even species of plants that you might not be able to identify, but if you look around, there are several. This is one end of the diorama. There's some zebras hiding on the other side that we'll show you in just a moment. But this is a good representation of what can be found in some of these places, again, because of those conditions of the environment. The really interesting thing happening here, though, is just a short ways to the east. So a short distance to the east of the Okavango Delta, we're cruising over. You can see all of that water. Look at how lush and nice that looks. Great place to stop and get a drink if you're a thirsty zebra. The area that we're heading to over at the east are called the Mahari Hottie salt pans. And these pans, they're just flat sort of areas where there's just salty crust. There's not a whole lot going on there. And for most of the year, it's really dry and really harsh and hot and inhospitable to a lot of species. So here's another one of Bob's pictures. I think we all are familiar with the imagery of a skull in a dry desert. We thought that was really evocative. So the Mahari Hottie pans are the leftovers of a gigantic salt lake. It was the size of Switzerland that dried up during the last ice age. So we can see them from the air now. Look at how dry and harsh, especially compared to the Okavango that we saw just a moment ago, looking really blue and green with all those water and plants. This area is dry, salty, crusty, and there are these populations of lions and hyenas that hang out there year round. And during the dry season, during a huge part of the year, they don't have a whole lot to eat. It's really hard to survive here, but something special happens during the wet season. When the rains come during that wet season, enough water flows through the Okavango Delta that the rivers that move toward the Mahari Hottie pans flood their banks, and this area begins to flood too. Those salt pans fill up with this briny, salty water, and tiny little eggs of brine shrimp that were laid the year before and dried out, rehydrate, They hatch, and flamingos, we learned about flamingos a few minutes ago with that awesome video from Mitch and some of our other teammates. Flamingos come through on their migration and they eat the shrimp. As plants begin to grow, lots of other species come to this area too, and animals like wildebeest and zebras pass through the area on their annual migration across Africa. There's wildebeest from the air. These are some of the longest migrations across Africa, and so this is a really special area for a lot of those species. There's a giraffe. Everybody loves giraffes. I love giraffes. Mitch loves giraffes. He's nodding along with me as I say that. Elephant, some of Bob's photos, looking happy as they splash along in that water. So I wanted to visit here again to really tell you, again, there's this relationship between the conditions of an environment and the biodiversity that's there. And as we're looking at these pans from the air, you can kind of see how for parts of the year, this wouldn't be a place that you wanted to live. Some places like the Amazon have consistently high biodiversity all year round. There's lots of species that live there and call that place home. Places like Antarctica have consistently low biodiversity. There's not a ton of species that can make it work. And in other places, that relationship is a little bit more seasonal. We're headed now away from the Okavango Delta. You can wave bye to it if you want. Bye, Okavango. Bye, Mahari Hottie. And we're heading on to our next spot. We're going to take a short journey across a small channel of water and head to an island off the coast of Africa. I bet you all can guess where we're going next. Someone already got it. You said it in the chat before I even finished my sentence. Holy wow. Someone must have told you my itinerary. You got a hold of our flight plans. Or maybe you're just that smart. You're just that good at guessing. That's right. We are headed to Madagascar next. So over this short distance of water, we're going to find an island. Now, we mentioned at the start when we did our poll that there are a few different ways that scientists think about biodiversity. One way that scientists think about it, define it, measure it, is the number of species that live in a particular area. But some scientists, some people focus on biodiversity or define biodiversity as the number of species that live someplace and nowhere else in the whole world. How many special species are only found in one spot? The name for a species that's found in one place and nowhere else is endemic species. And some scientists say more biodiverse places, high biodiversity is defined by the number of endemic species you have. And Madagascar is a place with a lot of endemic species. It makes sense if you think about it. Madagascar is an island. Islands tend to be places with a lot of endemic species, because if something ends up there, it's not really easy for them to get back to where they were before. And so often when a species makes it to an island, they stay there, and over millions of years, they evolve into a brand new species that's found nowhere else. So that's exactly what happened here. One endemic species that you might be familiar with that lives on Madagascar are lemurs. And there are lots of different species of lemurs. This is a ringtail lemur. I think they are so cute. Believe it or not, yeah, I see somebody saying, is there a lemur? There is a lemur. We've got one on the screen. Believe it or not, lemurs are primates, just like humans and chimpanzees and capuchins and lots of those other monkeys and apes that you're probably familiar with, but they don't really look like us, right? They look pretty different. There's maybe some more similarities between the features of a chimpanzee and a human than between a human and a lemur. And one of the theories that paleontologists and evolutionary biologists have is that the last common ancestor, the last ancestor that we share with a lemur, floated across that little channel of water between Africa, mainland Africa, and Madagascar millions of years ago on like a raft of palm fronds or vegetation or something. It got caught on an accidental boat, drifted across to Madagascar, and once it got there, couldn't get back. And so those lemurs just started to reproduce. They evolved over millions of years. It's the creature that you see on your screen today, and now they're nowhere else in the world. There are other endemic species on Madagascar too, like chameleons. There's one. There's lots of species of birds that are only found on Madagascar as well. So lemurs definitely are not the only one. But that's one of the ways that a scientist might measure biodiversity, is how many species are endemic in a particular place. Now, endemic species pose a really interesting challenge, or maybe not a challenge, but just a really interesting consideration for conservation scientists and ecologists like me. If a species is endemic, that means that it can't survive somewhere else in the world. So if their habitat goes away, maybe because of deforestation or climate change or some kind of disaster, those creatures can't just move somewhere else. They can't just get up and go to a different spot and learn how to survive there. They are specifically adapted for their environment, just like those birds on the Galapagos had the right beak for the right place where they lived. They can't just go somewhere else. And there are lots of endemic species all across the world. Where we're flying over right now, you can see India, and then we're headed towards Southeast Asia. There are a lot of areas on those continents, as well as other spots around the world, that have endemic species. We have them here in North America too, but these are places where there tend to be a lot and where those endemic species are under threat. That can be really scary and really kind of hard to think about and talk about, but luckily, I get a little bit of comfort when I think about that and talk about that by thinking about what people are doing to protect them. There are areas in the world that have so many endemic species, and where enough of those endemic species are starting to be lost that scientists and ecologists and conservationists have designated them as biodiversity hotspots. And that helps me feel a little bit better about it. Those hotspots get special protection, they get special designation. Helps me feel a little bit better knowing that there are people out there looking out for what could be going wrong and making sure to protect these spots. So we're going to drop in now over Southeast Asia and head toward one of our last destinations of the day. Our tour around this planet is going pretty quick. I wonder if you can guess it. It's my background. It was Mitch's background at the beginning of the show. Yeah, someone already got it. We are headed to a very special marine area. So this is a marine biodiversity hotspot. Marine means in the ocean off the coast of Australia. We're looking at the very, very northern tip of Australia right now. And yes, we are at the Great Barrier Reef. So the Great Barrier Reef is a coral reef made up of thousands of little islands, little underwater islands or hills of coral. That's all of those sort of light blue patches and spots and lines that you can see. They look a little bit lighter because the water is shallower over the top of them, because they kind of come up from the seafloor toward the surface. So they are covered in lots of different species of coral. Those islands run the length of Queensland in Australia, so they don't run the entire eastern coast of Australia, but it is so long, the Great Barrier Reef is so long that it is the same length as the Pacific coast of the United States. So take the coastline of Washington, the coastline of Oregon, and the coastline of California, and that is the length of the Great Barrier Reef. That is a huge, huge amount of space. So Ace is bringing us in. We're going to see some individual reefs come up. And as he flies around, I also want to tell you a little bit of a story. So I'm going to, I want to add a spotlight in. Here, we'll do that. I want to tell you all a little bit of a story about why I wanted to visit the Great Barrier Reef. Not only is this an area where we hear about it a lot. The Great Barrier Reef is often in the news as a place that we might see gone or lost due to climate change. As the waters warm up, the coral is under stress. This is a place that I have personally visited and that really shaped my experience as an ecologist and as a scientist. So when I was a graduate student, there's me, with my scuba diving gear on. When I was a graduate student, I traveled to Australia and the Great Barrier Reef to learn about coral, learn about how a warming climate, our warming planet, was influencing coral and their health, and also to learn how to talk to people about climate change and about climate science. And so I got to go scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef and do some studies and see how the coral was faring. And I have to be honest with you, as I sat on that flight all the way across the Pacific Ocean, it's about a 15-hour flight between San Francisco and Sydney, very long time to sit on an airplane, I was really worried. I spent the entire time thinking that when I got to the Great Barrier Reef, I was just going to see it dead. So as the ocean waters are warming up, and as we're putting more carbon into our atmosphere, the water in the ocean is not only getting warmer, it's also getting more acidic. And corals are really sensitive and they really like water that's a certain temperature and that's not super acidic. And so as all of these conditions are changing, the coral's getting more stressed out. And so I was really worried that I was going to just get in the water for the first time and see nothing but bleached white coral. So in this picture right here, you can see some pointy looking coral, maybe looks like antlers at the front of the picture. And to that sort of big flat coral on the left side of the screen, you can see a little white stripe along the edge. That's called bleaching, and that's something that happens when coral gets stressed out. They lose their pigment. There's little tiny organisms that live inside of corals that give them their color and help them photosynthesize. When they get stressed out, they spit them out, and then they look white. That's called bleaching, and it's a sign that coral is stressed. So I thought that that's what I was going to see everywhere, but that's not what I saw. We have more pictures. I think we're going to bring some up, pictures and videos. This is all video footage that I took with a GoPro while I was swimming. Sometimes I was all the way underwater with my scuba diving gear on, and sometimes I was on top of the water just floating with a snorkel. So some of that footage might be a little bit shaky. I apologize. It's kind of hard to swim and film at the same time, But if you look at all of these different shapes of coral, look at all of those different fish. It's hard to see the colors of everything underwater just because the blue kind of coloring of the water, it filters out things like red light and yellow light. But you can see these giant flat dinner plate coral. You can see those big wrinkly round brain coral. You can see coral that looks like antlers, coral that looks like pin cushions or hedgehogs. And you can see big fish and small fish. And I saw giant clams. I saw sea anemones. I saw sea cucumbers. I saw a shark. I saw a sea turtle. What I thought was going to happen is not what I saw. And what that made me realize is that, yes, the Great Barrier Reef is stressed. You saw that picture a minute ago of the bleaching, coral losing its pigment because it's stressed out, but it's not gone. It is so easy when we talk about climate change and climate science to think that it's a lost cause. There's nothing that we can save because nothing is left. It's too late for everything else. But I'm here to tell you that that is not true. We have a limited amount of time. Big changes need to be made to our behavior, to a whole country's behavior, to the world's behavior, if we're going to limit how much our planet warms and make sure that coral reefs and humans and toucans and Galapagos tortoises and everything else we've talked today, we need to make sure that they can survive. And there's big changes that we need to make that possible, but it's not too late and we can do it. There's some clownfish. I did find Nemo on the Great Barrier Reef. Got to see them, that was pretty fun. There's a color corrected picture so you can see how beautiful and orange they were. So just like I was saying to you as we cruised across Antarctica, life finds a way. We're going to start making our way now back toward North America. I don't want to just leave you here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But as we cruise across the Pacific, I want to just acknowledge it can feel really scary to talk about climate change. It can feel really, really scary to talk about the loss of biodiversity, the potential extinction. So if you're sitting there feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with all of this information, I feel so overwhelmed, you're not alone. It's my job, first of all, to talk about this and think about this, and I do it every day. But I still get a little bit scared sometimes, and I still get a little bit sad sometimes. But again, the thing that makes me feel better about this, and the thing that makes me feel okay, is thinking about just how tough we are and how good life is at overcoming challenge. So the last place we're going to go today is the Sonoran Desert. We're zooming in toward the border of California and Mexico and Arizona. There's a desert there. And that desert, the Sonoran Desert, if you look at it from the air, I think I put us on, so we've got a split screen here, and that was on purpose. So you can see me and hear me, and then also watch the desert. As you look at it, it looks a little bit like those Mahari Hottie pans, right? It looks really dry, looks really arid, definitely not that lush Amazon rainforest that we flew over. But this desert, for being harsh and dry and hot and all the things we often think of deserts as being, this is the most biodiverse desert in North America. We actually do have a picture of it. There we go. There's a picture of the museum diorama that we have here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. During parts of the year where water comes through, there's some more rainfall. Look at all of those colorful blossoms and blooms. You can see saguaro cacti. Those are an endemic species, by the way. Saguaro cacti are only found in the Sonoran Desert, and there are creatures. There's an owl that lives inside the one. You can see the little hole in it. There's an owl inside of there. There are flickers on top of it looking for bugs and perching there. Life finds a way. And so part of why I wanted to end up at the Sonoran Desert, there's some javelinas, there's relatives of pigs there hiding in the tall blooms and the colorful flowers in that diorama. Part of why I wanted to come through and talk about this desert as we make our way back to Colorado is, again, to just underscore that. If all of this beauty can come from a place that from the air looks really harsh and dry, if species can still figure out a way to survive in Antarctica, if countries, entire countries can work together. I was at the Glasgow climate talks just last month. I was in Scotland there to sort of watch as countries try to make an agreement on what to do next about climate change. And it wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it happened. And I like to say, you know what, if all of that is true, if so many species can survive in the desert or survive in Antarctica, if we as a species can come together and make an agreement about what to do next, if we can protect all of these places as biodiversity hotspots, there's hope for us. So if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know what to think, I'm scared, I'm sad about climate change, I get it, but we're tough. Life finds a way and we can do it. That is my big message to you. And with that, we are just about back at Colorado, and I think we're ready to take some questions. I have seen a ton of questions come through the chat. Mitch has actually been busily Googling the answer to some of them, because I'm going to be honest, I don't know the answer to absolutely everything. And so it's very possible that some of the questions that you asked me today, I will say, I don't know. And that's okay. Scientists don't know everything. Sometimes we have to Google stuff. So Mitch is going to ask me some questions. I'm going to pass him the mouse, step on the screen if you want to, and we will answer as many questions as we have time for. So what we usually do, I'll just say this first, is we usually talk for about 45 minutes. And then we answer questions until we hit an hour past our start time. So I have about 20 minutes of questions worth in me. We can do about 20 minutes worth of questions.
Perfect.
And if you have to go before then, we get it. It's okay. I do want to say a huge thank you to all of you for participating today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me tell you some of my stories.
And thank you for all these questions. There are so many really great questions. Let's start with this one. How do coral eat?
That is a great question. And coral are really interesting because, believe it or not, we don't always think of them this way. Coral are animals. Sometimes people think that they're plants because they tend to just stick on the reef, right? They put down these hard skeletons and they stay in one place their whole life. One coral, like one sort of mound of coral, or we saw those antler-shaped structures of coral, it's actually made up of tons of tiny little coral polyps. They eat in a few different ways. They have these little mouths that can grab on things. But one thing that's really interesting about coral, and one more thing they have in common with plants, is that they have these tiny little organisms, these little creatures that live inside of them called zooxanthellae. That is a big word. I'm not going to try and spell it for you, so you might have to Google that one. But zooxanthellae live inside each individual coral polyp, and they capture energy from the sun. They photosynthesize just like plants do and turn that sunlight into energy. And that's one of the ways that coral get their energy. When coral bleach, when they turn white, it's actually them spitting out their zooxanthellae. So you can see why it's hard and damaging for coral to go through that process of bleaching. That's actually what happens. Zooxanthellae are what give them their color. And so they spit them out and then they're white.
Cool. So we have actually a lot of questions that relate to this general idea. You mentioned endemic species that only live in one place. Mm-hmm. Why will a species only live in one particular place?
That is a good question, and it's one with a complicated answer that I probably can't get to every part of today. But one reason why, let's think about Madagascar. One reason why a species might be endemic is because they evolved in one place where they were isolated and they couldn't easily get from one place to another. So Madagascar has so many endemic species because it's an island. It's not easy for animals to just, or even plants, especially plants. Seeds can maybe travel a long way, especially if they're like air dispersed, but not all of them do. Again, what we think happened with lemurs is that an ancestor of lemurs, they ended up on a raft of palm fronds, vegetation all kind of woven together, and accidentally floated across that little slice of water over to Madagascar. We think that's what happened. And once they got to Madagascar, they couldn't get back. And so they evolved into brand new species there. So sometimes it's isolation. It's that they can't get somewhere else. Or maybe it's that they evolved in a remote mountain range or one particularly dense grove of forests. Sometimes what happens is that there will be a species that exists in a lot of places. And due to a natural event, like maybe there's a landslide that wipes out their passageway between where they are at that moment and another spot. And then half of their population's in one spot, half of their population's in another. And over millions of years, they evolve and they change and they end up as two different species. So that process is called speciation. If you want to learn more about it, it's an easy Google search. There are a lot of reasons why things would end up being endemic, but Madagascar is one good example of islands and isolation being part of why.
Very cool. So heading to Antarctica, 2 questions about Antarctica. Did it always have snow? And if not, what was there before? And also, could dinosaurs have survived there?
Ooh, that is a great question. I will answer the second one first, which is yes, there are actually, or there were, not are, I guess are if you go by the definition that birds are dinosaurs, there are still dinosaurs in Antarctica because penguins are dinosaurs. We do find dinosaur fossils in Antarctica. Some of our museum curators have been part of looking for those fossils, which is pretty cool. So we do know that dinosaurs were able to survive there. I am not knowledgeable in things like deep time. I don't know exactly what Antarctica was like before the modern era, but I do know that the conditions on planet Earth have changed. Earth is billions of years old and things have changed and fluctuated over time. And there have been periods in Earth's history where we did not have ice caps. So that is one thing to keep in mind. I would say, please take that with a grain of salt and go do some more research about the history, the geologic history of Antarctica. But our climate has changed a lot over the course of Earth's entire, 4 billion year history. One thing to note, yes, climates do change. Fluctuation in climate and conditions is completely normal, and we are accelerating the change that is happening and has been happening for the last 200 years. Wanted to make sure we called that out. Good question.
All right. And here's one of the ones that I checked up on using the internet. The question was, how long did it take Darwin to develop his theory? And one thing to note about it is it was not just Darwin's theory. His grandfather had actually published about it. A lot of people all around the world were already sort of had this idea. What Darwin did was he gathered a lot of information and he organized it in a way that really told the story and gave what we call evidence to the theory. And he wasn't the only person doing that either. There was another entomologist who was working on beetles, I think, and doing the same thing. But Darwin specifically spent about 5 years gathering data in the Galapagos, and then it took him 20 years to actually publish his data.
That actually makes me feel better about how much I procrastinate on things sometimes.
Oh,
If
yeah.
Darwin took 20 years to do it, it's fine. I could take a week to work on that thing. I will also call out too that, it wasn't just Darwin and other Western scientists who know this stuff. Indigenous people have known these things about planet Earth since time immemorial, since the very beginning of history, beginning of time. Indigenous people have been able to notice these things, and Indigenous people are also still caring for the biodiversity by using that traditional knowledge. So wanted to make sure we called that out too. What else we got?
Awesome. Why is the Amazon the Amazon River shaped like that?
Ooh, I don't know enough about the specific conditions of the Amazon to say it, but what I will say is that water is very, very powerful. Water has the ability to carve out canyons and geologic structures. Think about the Grand Canyon. That canyon was carved out over a long, long, long time by water flowing over the surface, and gradually things got deeper and deeper and deeper. So water has the ability not only to make depth, it also has the ability to make width. As more rains, as floods wash through, that it might overflow its banks and need to get a little bit wavier for a while. So water's going to go where water's going to go. And I think that's as good of an answer as I can give you there, is that things have just, the water's been moving there for a long time and it's carved out the path that it wants to take.
Fun. And I love the words you used. I think you used undulations and another word.
That's a good
So
word.
here's an easy one. How many types of birds are there in the world?
Oh man, at least 7. There are at least 7 kinds of bird in the world. I actually don't know the answer to that question, but there are lots.
I did look that up, and the answer is nobody knows. There have been 11,000 described bird species, but everyone thinks there are probably more.
That sounds about right. That's one thing that is really important for all of us to keep in mind as we learn about biodiversity, as we learn about dinosaurs, as we learn about geography and history, is there's not really a way for us to know everything and 100% say, yep, check, we got it. So there's a lot we still don't know.
All right, so a big one. If there were no humans, would that be better for the environment?
Ooh, it's a good question, and I'm taking a second to think about how to answer that question. So I imagine that where you were going with that question is the idea that humans and the actions that we are taking right now and the behaviors that we are having right now are causing a lot of harm to our planet. We can't deny that. Scientists, climate scientists, almost all of them agree that the changes that we're seeing in our planet right now are from our actions. It's resulting from us having burned a ton of fossil fuels in the last 200 years. But think about what happens when you remove an animal from its ecosystem. Think about what would happen if a species, just think of a species in your head and try and imagine what would happen if that whole thing, that whole species disappeared. Humans, I think it's a lot of people sometimes get caught up in thinking that humans and nature are separate. Humans and nature are not separate. We are part of nature. We evolved as part of the organisms that are on this planet. Humans are part of the biodiversity on this planet. And so just like removing raccoons or zebras or lemurs or anything else from our planet would have some really devastating impacts on the environment where those creatures are found, it would also probably be pretty devastating if we went away. And also if we had never evolved in the first place. Earth would be a very different place, because just like we are being shaped by our environment, we are also shaping it. That's how it works with every species on planet Earth. We are part of all of that. We are part of that continuum. And I think it's really interesting to think of, I don't know, some people just think of humans and nature as being separate, and they are not. They are the same in my head. Good question. That's a very thought-provoking one. And I'll be thinking about that for the rest of the day, probably. Good question.
Yeah, great question. Without us, mosquitoes wouldn't have anything to eat.
Fair enough.
They eat other animals too. So what is one piece of advice you'd like to give our young scientists interested in work like yours?
Ooh, that is a very good question. And I think I could probably continue to give you advice for a very long time. If you let me go for another hour, I could probably tell you all kinds of things. I think the big thing that I would advise anyone who's interested in climate science, who's interested in ecology, who's interested in the environment, in animals, things like that, is to just try and remain hopeful. Again, remember that humans are working really hard. There are a lot of people working really hard over the entire planet to protect it, to protect everything. Try and remember that we are working very hard to conserve biodiversity. Try and think about those penguins that have figured out how to huddle together in freezing cold Antarctica, or those little owls who have figured out how to burrow into those saguaro cacti and make that into their home. Think about how hard we're all working and think about how resilient species across the planet are. I think that's one thing that I would say to help you stay hopeful. The other thing that I would say, some other things that I would say is get good at talking to people. Being a scientist is half of the equation, right? So being good at talking and good at teaching is a really important skill, I think, for everyone who wants to be a scientist and everyone who's interested in studying our planet and learning more about it. Because what fun is knowledge if you're the only one that has it? It's way more fun when you can go and talk to people like all of you who chose to talk to me today and share what you know. So get good at talking to people. Maybe it's that you like to write them emails. Maybe it's that you like to teach classes like this one, but get good at talking to people. And the last thing I'll say is listen to Indigenous people. They know and have known for thousands and thousands of years. And so it's really important for us to take that traditional knowledge into account. Great question. What else?
Since you brought them up, why do penguins waddle?
Oh, I actually asked that question once to a penguin scientist, and what I believe she said, take this with a grain of salt, this is worth a Google. So penguins actually have pretty long legs. If you look at a penguin, you can't see my whole body here, but if you look at a penguin, they're kind of chunky. They look like their legs are like this long and their body just goes like all the way down to their feet. That is not actually the case. They've got long legs underneath all of that stuff. Really, it's that they've got like a layer of blubber around everything. Yeah, you can see penguins on the split screen. They look like kind of just big keel bosses, big tubes of penguin all the way down to their feet. They have long legs under all of that. And they've just got like this whole covering of fat and blubber to keep them warm because Antarctica is freezing cold. And so it's kind of like if you get out of the shower and you like wrap a towel around the lower half of your body really tightly and you can't do a walk, you have to kind of waddle. That's what it is that they've got so much bulk to keep them warm that they can't stride with the full length of their legs. Worth a Google search, but that is an answer from a penguin scientist that I met one time.
Amazing. Also, penguin scientist is a job you can grow up and have.
I'm not a penguin scientist and I don't know how to become one. Probably get a really good warm coat because you're going to have to go to Antarctica.
While we're in Antarctica, how do the animals in Antarctica find food to eat?
Oh, good question. Well, one of the areas where food can be found on Antarctica is in the water. And so penguins are very good swimmers. That's why they don't fly, is they instead have adapted rather than having flight feathers to having like warmth and dryness feathers. And instead of having long ones coming off of their wings to sort of support air, they've got these great flippers that can help them swim really, really speedily through the water. So they dive into the water and they look for fish and the creatures that live down there. And then leopard seals eat the penguins and things like that. So in the water is mostly where that food source is going to be found. Good question.
Cool. So why do different parts of the world have different environments?
Oh, there's a lot of reasons why that could be the case. Sometimes it's the amount of sunlight they receive. So the angle of the sun, our Earth is a big globe. If you've joined us for other Digital Earth Academy programs before, we've had Bob, our usual speaker, shine a flashlight on a globe before. I don't have a globe or a flashlight today, I'm so sorry. But at some parts of the world, the angle of the sun is like, here, this is the Earth. The sun's like shining right on top of it. And toward latitudes up near the poles, the angle of the sun changes a little bit. And so that changes things like sunlight, that changes things like warmth. If you joined us for our weather and climate programs, we talked a little bit about what causes things like storms, like landforms. If you joined us for our climate program, we talked a little bit about like air currents and ocean currents and how that can move things around. So it's all a whole lot to do with the sun, the rotation of the Earth, landforms, and how that might steer weather patterns from place to place. There are scientists that dedicate their whole entire lives to studying that exact thing. So that's the answer I'll give you for now.
Good answer.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about endangered animals. Are there any endangered plants?
There are endangered plants, and I will say I am not as much of a botanist as some others are, but yes, there are endangered plants, and I highly recommend that you Google them, because I'm not going to be able to tell you a whole lot about what they are, other than to say that yes, they exist.
All right. Now, do you remember way back we were at the Galapagos?
I do.
And you showed us those saddle shell tortoises.
I do.
Why did they evolve those weird looking shells?
Oh, great question. I keep giving this caveat, but I'm gonna keep saying it because I think it's important to remind everybody that scientists don't always know the answer to everything right away. I'm not a turtle expert. I'm not a tortoise expert. We do have one of those on staff here at the museum, Dr. Tyler Leeson. I should go ask him. But as I was researching this program and learning a little bit about all of this, I saw suggested in one scientific paper that it might have been that turtles need to have the right shaped shell to roll back onto their feet if they get flipped upside down. So turtles and tortoises, sometimes they're walking along, they're kind of clumsy, and maybe they slip on something and they roll, and then they're ending up on their back with their legs in the air, sitting on their shell. Maybe depending on the terrain of the particular island that they live on, it might be easier for them to roll back onto their back if they have a domed shell versus if they have a more saddle shaped shell. That's about as much as I can tell you. As I was researching this program, I did find that information.
All right.
So something about their environment makes that advantageous.
I also Googled it, and another possibility is it suggests that it allows them to lift their little head up farther. So they might be able to reach.
We have a picture
plants.
of, let's put up one of those saddle shaped shells again on the screen. Our producer Kim can bring that up any moment now. Yeah, look at how high that tortoise's shell rises above its head. So maybe if you've got that kind of shell, you're on an island where you have to lift your head up to eat something. This is my little turtle head. You have to be able to lift your head up a little ways to be able to eat off the branches, get the vegetation. And maybe if you have a dome-shaped shell, the vegetation is lower to the ground. So again, it's all about the conditions of the environment. That's it. That's what underlies biodiversity. That's what underlies adaptation. It's all about the environment.
Related question, does every type of bird have a different type of beak?
Ooh, well, you know a thing or two about this, having made that awesome video for us. It's not that every single species of bird has a slightly different beak. It's that beaks and bills are always going to be what that bird needs for its environment and for its food, right? So form follows function, which means that something looks the way that it looks because it works the way that it works. And so certain species like flamingos, they've got those long curved ones that allow them to sort of filter feed. There are others called roseate spoonbills, or spoonbills for short, that have like spoon-shaped beaks. They're called spoonbills because if you Google them, they have a hilarious bill. It looks like a giant spoon. They're also kind of skimmers. They skim off the surface and filter feed with their beak that way. You know, it's all about what they eat and where they live and what's going to be most advantageous. There's a lot of birds like crows have those generalist beaks, so they can eat a lot of different stuff. There are lots of eagles and hawks and raptors that have that curved beak that can rip stuff apart. There are even some bills out there that have crossed over beaks. So Google crossbills. We have some that live here in North America. Their beak is designed especially to pick little seeds out of like pine cones or, you know, out of trees and things like that. And having that kind of crossed over bill shape allows them to get in there and really pry their food out. So it's all about what that organism eats, what that bird eats, and where that bird lives.
Awesome. Back to coral.
Okay.
How does coral survive when it stays still for its whole life?
Good question. So the answer here is that not everything needs to move around. Organisms evolve to do what they need to do to survive where they live. You know, you're sensing a theme here probably. Not everything needs to move around to be able to survive. For some species, the food that they eat is not always going to come to them, and so they need to be able to move around. Humans are a good example. We have to go to the grocery store. We have to go to Target. We have to move around. But coral, because they are filter feeders, they just grab things from, you know, just floating around in the ocean, or they are photosynthesizers. They can just turn light, sunlight into energy. They don't need to move around. And it's kind of like, I get it. why would I get up from the couch when someone can bring me potato chips while I'm sitting there? You know, so not every creature needs to be able to move around to go find food. And why should you move around if your food can just come to you? So that's the answer there is, again, form follows function. Coral don't need to move around, so they don't. Kind of like me on a Saturday morning.
All right, I think we're just about at time,
I think so.
but one last question. Why did you go underwater?
Why did I go underwater? Because it sounded fun, is my honest answer there. I mean, so the serious answer to that question of why I decided to go get a scuba certification and why I wanted to go underwater and why I wanted to do research underwater is because that's where the cool stuff is. You know, studying coral, you can look at pictures and you can read textbooks and you could look at diagrams, but seeing things close up with your eyes is so cool. And so going underwater and being able to go, because coral's not all near the surface, you know, there's these big hills underwater that we were talking about, and there's corals down near the bottom of those hills, and there's coral in the middle, and there's coral kind of close to the top, but not all the way, and there's coral at the top. And they might be a little bit different. The ones that live deeper might be different than the ones that live at the top. So being able to go down there and look at everything, that's a cool way to learn about that stuff. So I wanted to go underwater because I got to see everything with my eyes. I got to study everything where it happens and see everything in real time. And the other answer is because it sounded fun. If you ever think about getting scuba certified, I think you have to be 10 years old to be able to do it. But if it's something that you're watching today and you're saying, that looks really fun, I want to do it. Do it. It's really fun. I can say so. All right. I think that might be our last one. So just thank you, everybody, from Mitch and I both, and from our pilot Asa, and from Bob and Kachun and Jessa and Kim and our entire Digital Earth Academy team. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. We will have, and don't end the webinar just yet, we will have another edition of Digital Earth Academy starting up in 2022. So after everybody comes back from their holiday break coming up in just a couple weeks, we'll have more Digital Earth scientists in action and other virtual adventures coming to you in 2022. So stay tuned, stay curious, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.